Hey everybody, welcome back to the Explore the Road podcast. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Rebecca CLiffe, the founder of the Sloth Conservation Foundation. Rebecca has dedicated her life to the study and conservation of one of the world's most vulnerable and unique species, the sloth. Today we're going to be talking about what a sloth scientist does day to day, new scientific findings from her work, what it is that's unique about the way sloths go to the loo, fun facts about sloths in general, and much more. Welcome back to the Explore the Road podcast. How long exactly have you been working with sloths, and where are you working with them?
I've been working for sloths, if you can believe this, for 16 years of my life now, almost half my life. And I've been in Costa Rica for all of that time.
When I think about the range of sloths, where they're actually found, I don't know exactly the kind of how far their range is. How far do they expand around Costa Rica?
Well, they're throughout South and Central America. If you want the exact answer, it's within about 17 degrees of the equator. So they can only live where it's really nice and warm and the climate's stable. We've got two species here in Costa Rica, but there's seven species in total, and they range all the way down through Brazil. So we do have some projects going on in different places, but yeah, Costa Rica is the heart of where my work happens.
And you mentioned there, I mean, I had no idea there were seven sloth species, but you work with two species. Which are the two species that you work with in there, and how do they kind of differ? What makes them different?
So we've got, yeah, there's seven species in total. The two that we have in Costa Rica, one's called the brown-throated three-fingered sloth. It's a bit of a mouthful. And the other one's called the Hoffman's two-fingered sloth. And the obvious difference there is the number of fingers, right? A lot of people, they used to call them the three-toed sloth and the two-toed sloth, but honestly, all sloths have got the same number of toes. So it's a ridiculous naming system. And about probably about 13 years ago now, we decided we're going to change the name because I was so tired of people looking at the sloth's toes and getting the wrong type of sloth. So started campaigning for the three-fingered and two-fingered name, and then changed it on Wikipedia and published some papers with that name, and now it's somehow become the most accepted name. So they're actually very different animals, though. These two types of sloth we have here in Costa Rica, they're 30 million years apart in terms of evolution. So really, we're dealing with two completely different animals, which makes my job extra interesting.
But they operate in the same zones. They're not like living in different trees. They kind of a massive overlap basically with habitat.
Yeah, they completely overlap. So they share trees. I often see the two types of sloth sleeping right next to each other. But I mean, it's amazing. It's an example of convergent evolution, right? You know, when two species evolve to a really similar lifestyle, but they do it separately. So they both have this really slow way of living. They both live up in the trees, upside down. They both eat leaves. They both only go to the bathroom once a week, and they only do it on the ground, but that has all evolved completely separately. And so you can you can be forgiven for looking at them and just thinking, "Oh, sloths, they're all the same." But when you jump into their biology, they're so different. You know, the two-fingered sloths are much larger, they're much faster, they've got a faster metabolism. Unluckily for me, they also have big teeth, and they quite capable of defending themselves. I've got an injury.
I'm going to ask you about that actually. Yeah.
So yeah, you've got quite a feisty type of sloth, and then the three-fingered are like the opposite end of the scale. They're more like aliens. They move so slowly. They're so sensitive to any kind of change or stress or disturbance. And yeah, they're much gentler. My personal favorite. Don't tell the others,
Ooh,
but
I did not know I was going to get that reveal on this podcast. The and so working there, what does a normal day, if there is such thing as a normal day, in your job? It's hard to kind of figure out what your daily routines are.
it's a perfect time to ask me that question because last week my days were completely wild. I was out in the jungle for 15 hours a day tracking sloths. We had to try and get some tracking collars on sloths living in a primary rainforest here, which is really difficult. So we spent so many hours just tracking through the jungle. We managed to catch four sloths last week, which is quite a lot of sloth for 1 week. So it was really like involved, out there with sticks in my hair and dirt under my nails. Um, and then this week, I have been sat at the computer all day long doing grant applications and emails, and it's been terribly boring, honestly. But my job is just covers a little bit of everything these days because on one hand, I'm still a sloth scientist and I still like to be out in the field, but on the other hand, I'm also running a charity and I still have to do all of the admin and the human resources and fundraising and stuff that comes along with running a team of people. So yeah, it's quite different.
Well, you casually mentioned, oh yeah, we went and captured some sloths. I mean, these things are up in the trees, and they, as you just mentioned, they come down once a week. So, what exactly? How does one go and catch a sloth? I mean, how do you find the sloth in the first place, and then how do you catch it?
That's a good question. So it's one of my life skills now, apparently. We There's two types. So we have a lot of our work works with urban sloths. So sloths living in disturbed areas. You don't really think of sloths as an urban species, but here in Costa Rica, they are. They live in the hotels and the restaurants and in the bakery and in the bar. So we have a lot of sloths with tracking collars on that are living in those environments. So for part of the week, our job was actually to go out and find those and then catch those guys. And that they're quite easy to find because they've not got many hiding places. But catching them is a bit of a different story. We have to wait for them to move into a location where we can either grab them or where we can climb to get them. Because the thing with sloths is they love hanging out on the very tips of the branches of the biggest trees. And those branches can't support the weight of a human. And also, if we start to climb the tree, the sloth's like, I'm just going to go into the next tree. And then you're like, oh. So it's really hard. Yeah, we have to really wait for them to move into a good spot. But the other half of the week, as I mentioned, we're in the primary forest where it is so hard to even see a sloth, never mind catch one. So we just spent hours walking, a whole team of us through the jungle in a line looking for sloths. And we did it for about 7 hours and we just emerged onto the roadside all like disheveled, not seeing a single sloth. And then one of my team, Diego, was like, there's one there.
Oh wow! Right next to the road.
Yeah. And so yeah, we climbed the tree. He was in a good place and we caught him. Um and yeah, got a tracking collar on him. He's called Aki.
It's a great
So
name. I have
yeah.
no idea what it means, but
It's Spanish for here. We were tired.
earlier on, people who were watching the screen when we were talking about how they have teeth, you were mentioning the sloths have teeth. You showed your hand and you had a wound because sloths are incredibly cute. I mean, you could argue they're up there, top five cutest animals in the world.
Number one.
Number one, in your opinion, that's totally valid. It's you're not biased, but they do have a dark side. Those claws. I actually didn't know about the teeth, but the claws are particularly powerful.
Yes, I wouldn't call it a dark side. I'd call it their like hidden superpower. But their claws are their finger bone. Firstly, so it's just the tip of the finger that's elongated and curved. And what's incredible in sloths is they're most relaxed when they're holding on. So this is their natural position, and they have to use energy to let go.
Oh wow!
And they've got these really big, thick, strong tendons that close the claws, and it makes them exceptionally strong. Like the grip strength of a sloth is stronger than a human. Um, and a lot of people think a sloth, if it's trying to defend itself, might like slash you with those claws, but that's not what they do. It's actually far worse. They'll grab hold of you in the claw, um, and once they've got hold of you, you cut they won't let go. Like they will hold on. And it's really strong. And then they bring you to the mouth and they'll bite you. And the teeth, they've got really big, they're called pseudo canines at the top and the bottom. They're not true canines, but they
Hmm.
look like it.
Right.
And they overlap. So yeah, if you get bitten by a sloth, it is not good. I've seen people with terrible disfigurements from sloth bites.
Wow.
Thankfully, this is not a sloth bite. This is a claw. Um, because when we catch a sloth, we have to try and get them out the tree, and they're also really, really flexible. So even though I held it in the correct way, the sloth managed to get its arm over its head and then get me with its claws on my hand here. So that was the tip of the claw, like digging in. So,
How much does a sloth weigh? You know, you say you're kind of you're grabbing them out of the tree and they've got these huge claws. You know, how much do they weigh on top of all of this? Because they look quite heavy.
oh, the three-fingered sloths are only about 4 kilograms, so they're not too bad. The two-fingered sloths are much bigger, and the biggest one I've ever seen was 12 kilograms. Um, Which is actually, it's not. I mean, you can hold them okay, but what I struggled with, and especially on this week, there was a case when I was getting a sloth that was actually injured out of a palm tree. He had a big wound on his face, and I climbed up quite a long ladder to get up the palm tree, and I had the sloth, but it's hard to explain. But try to catch a sloth, you need both hands on the sloth, and then you don't have anything to hold onto the tree with, and because the sloth's really quite heavy, it like offsets your center of gravity, but you're up a tree. It's a whole thing.
And it sounds like a complicated thing. But you mentioned there that the sloth had an injury, because a life in the canopy is dangerous, and they're not immune to, even though they can hold on, they fall. Do you often see, injured sloths in your area in terms of your working area?
Yeah, sadly a lot because for several reasons, but particularly around the urban area, which is where a lot of our work focuses, because that's where the sloths need our help. We do encounter sloths with a lot of injuries, and it's a really sad situation. There's about approximately 3,000 sloths per year lost from just our area. So the populations are declining quite rapidly, and the leading causes of that are number one is being electrocuted on power lines. Number two is being attacked by domestic dogs when they're moving on the ground. And number three is being hit by cars when they try and cross the road. So, yeah, as you can imagine, an urban environment's a very dangerous place for a sloth that can't run, can't jump, can't really defend itself, other than trying to bite, which we've already talked about that. But yeah, this was a sloth we've been monitoring for a while, and he had a big puncture wound on the side of his face, which they can also get from fighting with other sloths. That can be a completely natural injury as well. So we just needed to make sure he hadn't been attacked by a dog, which was my primary concern. So we got him out, checked him over, made sure he had no other puncture wounds, made sure this one was clean and healing okay, and yeah, got him back in the tree where he belonged. So
I wonder if the sloths appreciate the amount of care that they're getting in terms of, the overseer.
I don't know. I think they hate me.
I mean, one of the things you mentioned before, you're climbing into the trees. The three-toed sloth is quicker than the two-toed.
Fingered,
The toad, fingered,
fingered
fingered.
dog.
The three-fingered sloth is quicker than the two-fingered.
Yeah. No,
Um,
the other way around. The two-fingered sloth's quicker than the three-fingered.
so the two-fingered is quicker than the three-fingered. What kind of speeds are we talking about here? Because I, was reading that they are. Is it true that they are the slowest mammal in the world?
Yes.
Well, I'm guessing that would be the two-fingered,
Three-fingered.
three-fingered.
Oh, the three-fingered are do hold the title as the slowest mammals in the world. Um, the two-fingered can move faster than you think, right? But the thing with sloths is if we're taking average speed of movement, everything they do is is slow, right? So even when they blink or when they move their head or move their arm, everything's at this really slow measured pace. And a lot of for a long, long time, that was considered to be laziness. I mean, the word sloth, the name sloth comes from the deadly sin of being slothful, right? They were named after the deadly sin. So, um, but what we're starting to understand now is that they're not sat around being lazy all day. They're actually quite active. They're moving all the time. They're just doing it really slowly. And the benefit of that is that it helps them blend in perfectly with the rainforest canopy. They move just like a branch swaying in the wind. So it makes them camouflage perfectly with the environment around them. But having said that, when they do get scared and when it is a life or death situation, a two-fingered sloth can turn it up a notch. They can move a little bit faster, but only for a short period of time. Then they get exhausted. and have to take a
I mean,
nap.
I feel them there. When you look at their fur, it looks incredibly wiry.
Hmm.
You know, it
It's
is.
not.
It's not.
Yeah, don't go stroking sloths, but it's not. They're they're very soft. They're deceptively soft. They've got really nice fur, and the reason why is because their hair is really, really important for them to keep warm, which you wouldn't think is a problem for an animal living in the tropics. But sloths can't regulate their own body temperature because that takes a lot of energy. So it's actually very smart. They live where it's constantly nice and warm, and then they don't have to spend energy on regulating their body temperature. They just exist, but they have to have that thick fur coat on to keep them warm. So if they were to have like wiry, knotty, messy fur, then it would absorb all the water when it rains. It'd weigh them down, you know. So they spend a lot of time scratching, grooming, keeping their fur in good condition, and that in turn helps them stay waterproof and also keeps them warm.
There's another wild thing that I've seen online, and that is sloth ears. Now,
Ah!
you know, is it AI? Is it real? Sloths seem to have real ears.
They do sloth. Okay, again, a difference. We've got the two fingered and the three fingered. The two fingered sloths have little human shaped ears. It's the most shocking thing. Nobody expects them to have these little human ears under all their fur. But three fingered sloths don't. They have just like holes going into their head, like aliens.
With all your experience, all your knowledge on these animals, do you have a favorite sloth fact? It's a tough one.
Mm. Oh, I have a few favorite sloth facts. Excellent. Can I reel you off a whole list? Because
Yeah, you can, absolutely. Reel off. I'm sure people want to know.
I think one of my favorite sloth facts, which I think underscores everything about a sloth, right, is you may have heard of it. To be honest, it might not be surprising to you, but one of my favorite facts is that it's their rate of digestion because it really explains why they're so slow. So for a sloth, it takes them 30 days to digest one single leaf. So to put that into sort of something we might relate to, essentially the equivalent of you eating a salad and then taking a month to get any energy out of it. And yet they've evolved to live in this amazing way that conserves enough energy that is a sustainable lifestyle for them. And as a result, you can imagine they don't have much room in their stomachs because it's full of leaves from the previous month. So they're not eating very much either. Um, and their stomach contents weigh up to 30% of their body weight, which is pretty incredible. Um, and then the fact that they only go to the bathroom once a week on the forest floor and that nobody has got any idea why, right? It's one of the weirdest behaviors, but scientists we're still trying to figure it out. I've got my theory.
That is wild. I had no idea it took them that long to digest food.
Yeah, it's pretty bonkers to be honest. It's amazing that they survive at all, but they do, and I think that's amazing. My other, it's not really a favorite fact about sloths, but it's something that I really love about them is their approach to life, and it inspires me every day because a lot of times, particularly with my job, there's a lot of chaos going on all the time, a lot of things happening, and it can get really overwhelming. And I think a lot of people can relate to that and the hustle and bustle of life and having to always be on the go. And a lot of times, I just step back now and think about the way sloths live their life and what we can take from that. And how if we were all just a little bit more like a sloth, then we'd all be much happier and the planet would be much healthier. And so yeah, it's just one of my favorite things about them is how they don't conform to the way everything else lives. They just take life at their own pace and don't get stressed about anything um, that's going on around them. They just focus on their own thing and get on with it. And I love that.
And, I can totally see that where you're coming from because any clip, any image, any time I've ever seen a sloth, they do always look sort of serene, even when you see them, you see videos of them, kind of covered in rain. They seem to be absolutely loving life at the same time.
They're completely content with what they have at all times. The only time you see a sloth stressed out is if it's in immediate danger of death. That's it.
And that's totally fair.
Yeah, the rest of the time, their stress levels just getting on with life.
I'll tell you what, I mean, if I could take that into my day to day, I think that would be a pretty good thing. Life is pretty crazy.
Okay, you need to channel your inner sloth.
Yeah, my inner sloth. Well, with all the work that you're doing, you mentioned before that you're using collars um, on the sloths. You know, what sort of data are you hoping to collect? You know, what are you looking to find out by putting these collars on the sloths?
Well, what is quite might be quite surprising is that considering sloths, adored all over the world, in terms of science, we actually don't know that much about them because when I first started doing this 16 years ago, there wasn't any long term data on sloth behavior or movement. It was just completely absent. No one had done it before. And the reason why is that they're so hard to see, they're so hard to observe in the wild. And the technology hadn't been there in the past for us to properly follow them and understand what they're doing. So we started putting tracking collars on GPS devices, and then also micro data loggers that measure really fine body movements and other factors like temperature and pressure, so we know how high they are in the tree. And we collect all of this data over several months for one individual sloth, and then we can put it all together and see exactly how they are living their life and where they're moving and what the environment is like around them. So we can start to understand what it is that they need to survive and then how humans are affecting that. So as I mentioned, we monitor a lot of sloths that live in very urban, very degraded environments, but we also monitor sloths living in pristine primary rainforests. And the reason why is we need to be able to compare them. I want to know what the sloths are doing in healthy environments and how that has changed in the urban areas, and what can we do to help them better survive and better have access to resources in those areas.
Are you finding massive differences between the two?
But what's really interesting about the research is as a I've been doing this for a long time now, and I often feel like I know enough to make some pretty accurate hypotheses on what's happening with the sloths, but they constantly surprise me. They constantly throw up new things that I never expected. And one of the things we've actually uncovered this year, when we've looked back at the last decade's worth of data, we started compiling it all and really diving into it. And it turns out that one of the things that's really affecting them in urban areas and in disturbed habitats is not what I expected. I thought it was going to be access to resources or the ability to move between fragments that aren't connected. But it's temperature. So sloths living in urban areas are much more affected by temperature than sloths are in primary rainforests. And we spoke earlier briefly about how sloths can't regulate their body temperature. And so when you think about it, what's happening is sloths in primary forests, they have access to all these, we call them microclimates, areas in the forest where they can cool down. They can find a nice patch of shade if they need to, or they'll go up to the top of the tree and sunbathe to warm up. They're able to regulate their body temperature via their behaviors. But in these urban areas, sloths aren't able to do that. So they're stuck in maybe one or two trees, and neither of those trees have any good shade, or they're stuck in an area which doesn't get good sun because there's a building in the way. And so what's happening is they're not able to regulate their body temperature. Um, and that's really affecting them. And that correlates with what we're seeing in rescue centers now, too. We're seeing a huge influx of sloths being rescued because their body temperature is either too high or too low. Basically, yeah, they're, and they're having to, really deal with that situation and warm them up and all the things that come along with that, replenish the gut bacteria and all that stuff. So yeah, it's an issue, and the science is matching what we're seeing happening in the rescue world, which is painting a pretty clear picture of what we need to do to help them.
Are sloths territorial? If one sloth comes in, will another one, leave?
No, they hold home ranges, but they aren't territorial, so they don't fight over access to territories because they don't need that many resources to survive. We mentioned about the leaves already. They don't eat many leaves, so there's no competition over that. They'll happily share a tree with another sloth. The only time they won't do that is when there's a lady involved. So if there's a female in heat, then males will fight over access to her. And then you do get some sloth drama unfolding.
Is there a clear answer to you in terms of how you combat that thermal regulation in urban environments?
Oh, not ideally, no, because it's a combination of it's climate change exasperating things, and then this lack of habitat availability. So, what we're doing now, we do a lot of habitat restoration work and tree planting and things. And instead of just planting trees that we know sloths like to use for food, now we're planting trees that we know provide these microclimates, fast growing species that can provide shelter and things. So it is informing what we're doing, but it's going to take a long time to fix, and it's a big problem.
Well, it for me it sounds fantastic. I mean, I have a scientific background, and I'm so used to reading things, papers, and the kind of the results, the actionable things are always so much further down the line, and it's so interesting to hear that the current data you're collecting is informing what you're doing right now, and it's to me, yeah, that's awesome to hear the fact that the data that you're collecting is literally changing the way you approach uh, the protection of the sloths.
Well, this is like almost the reason I'm on this life path because when I graduated with my PhD, I had this choice to make. I could either go into academia and go down the postdoc route, or I could go off by myself and try and do things a little differently, go my own way. And I decided to go my own way because I've always seen this massive discrepancy between the results of research in academia and what's actually happening on the ground to help the species. I've seen it with sloths a lot. Like there's a lot of findings being published, but nothing being done. Um, and I really wanted to change the narrative on that and make sure that the work I was doing was actually benefiting the sloths. And then also be able to interpret the science that's being published and make a difference with it. So yeah, that's kind of why I started the foundation, and why I'm still doing what I'm doing. And it feels really good, like you said, to be able to discover something and then actually take it and turn it into a meaningful action that's actually doing something.
And you mentioned before, with the science that you're involved with, about sloths pooping, only pooping once a week, and there are different theories about sloth poop,
And never get
and
sick from the poop.
well, so sloths only poop once a week. Uh, why is that? And they come down to the ground to poop. Um, that seems like a waste of time to me.
It's an enigma for sure, for several reasons. Um, Firstly, sloths. Why would you carry around all that extra weight? You're trying to save energy. Why would you carry it around? And it's the whole thing. It's the poop and the pee. So they're carrying everything around for a week, and it weighs a lot. They can again lose another 30% of their body weight when they go to the bathroom. So it's crazy. Um,
It sounds
Secondly,
uncomfortable.
yeah, uncomfortable and a lot of energy. Why would you climb down to the ground to do it when most of their predators are ground based? That's where all their big threats are. Why would you come down and put yourself in harm's way to do that? Um, so there's a lot of like strange things going on, right? It's like, why are they doing this? And why has it evolved twice in both types of sloth? It's got to be something pretty strong happening. And there's a lot of theories, one of which is that they're fertilizing the trees that they feed from, which is quite a nice idea, right? That they eat the leaves and then poop on the ground, and it fertilizes the tree that then produces more nutritious leaves. Um, you've got the theory that it stems from them being giant ground sloths. So historically, if we go back 60 million years, sloths were actually huge and they lived on the ground. So maybe this is a remnant behavior from those days. Um, and then my theory is relates to pheromones and communication. because we've seen a lot of this behavior, and particularly when we have a female that we know is in estrus, and then she'll come down to the ground and do that every single day while she's in estrus. And the male sloths will come across the ground and they'll poop at the same place she pooped. So we've got some communal latrine use going on, and yeah, it's taken me a long time to start putting the pieces of the puzzles together, but we're getting there. And then you've got this whole fascinating relationship with the sloth and the sloth moth and the algae in the fur, um, which I'm going to try and briefly summarize. So there's no easy way to summarize this, but sloths have got an entire ecosystem that lives in their fur. And that includes several different species of fungi and algae that are found nowhere else on the planet, just in sloth fur. And it turns them green, so it's an excellent way of them camouflaging. They also have a type of moth that lives in the fur that's called a sloth moth. That is the actual name of the moth. And when the sloth comes down to the ground to poop, the moths run off the sloth, lay their eggs in the sloth poop, and then run back on the sloth before it climbs the tree again, because the moths need the poop to lay their eggs in. If you're a moth and you need sloth poop, what's the best way to find sloth poop? To sit on a sloth and wait for it to poop. So the moths are basically just hitching a ride on the back of the sloth. And what we think is happening is that the moths also provide a benefit to the sloth by fertilizing that algae that grows in their fur. So they get better camouflage and the moths get a place to live. So it's a nice mutualistic relationship, and it may explain why they're pooping on the ground,
Wow.
potentially.
And I guess if you're gonna, you want to protect anywhere, if that's, you want to protect the sloth that you're living on. So it makes, I mean, to me, that makes complete sense. It's a crazy relationship.
It's wild. It is wild. It's one of my favorites for sure. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time marveling over sloths and moths and poop. And if I have a really good week in the jungle, like last week, and I'm doing a lot of jungle, a lot of sloth stuff, I go to bed at night and I have sloth moths in my hair.
I mean, that doesn't sound like the dream. I'm going to be completely honest with
I
you.
love it. I love them.
Your the company, the project that you set up,
Yes, the Sloth Conservation Foundation, but that's a bit of a mouthful, so we call it SLOCO for short.
it kind of sounds like Slow Coach, which I like.
Slow coach.
You know what I mean? Uh,
It's true.
and how many people are working for you, at the moment, and what are your hopes for the project, kind of going forward over the next, year, 2 years, 3 years?
Right now we have 12 full-time staff, which is I'm still getting used to this because in 2017 when I started the charity, it was just me by myself. And now my head's still spinning a little bit that I've got a whole team of people working alongside me on this dream. And yeah, essentially what we do is it's a mix. We still do a lot of research to inform the conservation, but we also do a lot of physical, hands-on work with communities. So it's all about trying to get sloths and people to coexist peacefully. So lots of different strategies for that, but mainly about empowering people who own land in countries like Costa Rica to make it as wildlife and sloth friendly as possible. So a lot of reforestation on these lands. We install a lot of wildlife bridges to help animals like sloths and monkeys move safely through these urban areas. A lot of education and yeah, many different things. But it's great because what's nice is just in the 8 years we've been doing this work, we're able to see such a tangible difference, and we know that what we're doing is working, and that gives me a lot of hope, which I think is really important when we're facing so many environmental challenges that only ever seem to be getting worse. We know that there's things that also help and that work. We just have to be able to scale them and expand them.
That sounds awesome. And and it's one of those things which the science that you're doing now, you're actioning a plan now, and you're seeing results effectively of that, which is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And if that's the most satisfying thing, it's the thing that keeps us all going is that we see benefits, we see positive things happening. One of my favorite things is see because we put camera traps on all of our wildlife bridges, and we have 360 wildlife bridges now, which somehow is the largest network of wildlife bridges in the world. And I'm like, how have we done that? But we have all these camera traps, and every day we look at the footage, and there's so many species using them. We've got over 50 different species using the bridges every single day. And sloths, I mean, are one of the top ones, but we've also got all the species of primate in Costa Rica and kinkajous and anteaters, everything. We even have a tree frog hopping along a wildlife bridge. So yeah, these little wins keep us going. It like reminds me why we're doing what we're doing and that it's working, and we just have to, like a sloth, stay focused on that.
Mm. And I mean, I wanted to ask, what do you think we could take from sloths? But you mentioned it before,
Hmm.
just taking a breath and slowing down.
Yeah, breathing and just focusing on what matters and not listening to all the noise. Just get rid of the noise, slow down, focus on what brings you happiness and peace and joy, and doing that because, well, what are we here for?
That is, the advice you take from a sloth. And yeah, I always ask, what advice would you give your younger self? It doesn't necessarily have to be around work or, if you could teleport yourself back in time, if you could give yourself one bit of advice, what would it be?
Well, that's a nice question. I think it'd be to be more confident in my bold decisions. Like I always had a gut feeling deep down that I knew what I needed to do next, but I always doubted myself. Um, and I think I wish I'd just been more confident and gone for it sooner. And took the big bold steps because I've never regretted taking one of those. So they've not always worked, but I've never regretted trying. So I'd try more. I'd do that. But yeah, and we live and we learn. Everything's a journey, isn't it? So I don't really regret anything. But yeah, going moving forwards, that's the advice I take.
That for me is a perfect place to end. But what a fascinating conversation. I know more about sloths than I ever did before. And it's been awesome. Honestly, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating.
No, it's been so nice chatting to you. Thank you for having me on the podcast.